Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yay, okay. Thank you for your patience. As we're welcoming folks, really happy to have you all on the call today. Clemency Coast to Coast. Super important conversation for us to have. Super important, activism for us to be involved in right now as we are in the face of COVID-19. As we know, of course, people who are inside are suffering and have literally had their sentences turn into death sentences. And so I think it's important for California and New York to partner up right now and to really think about how we can join in solidarity in our advocacy right now. Thinking of course, Governor Newsom and Governor Cuomo, positioning themselves as progressive leaders. I think it's our job as their constituents, as people who are impacted by this pandemic, to make sure that they understand exactly what it is that they need to do, in order to move forward in protecting our states and in order to lead the country, forward in what we need to do. So thank you for joining today, and also thank you for your patience with our technical things happening here. Of course, we're all moving from, being in person and used to really joining one another and mobilizing in person, and now we're switching over to this virtual effect. So I thank all of you for your patience as we've been figuring that out. And so I'd like to welcome you to the call. We have really powerful speakers today, 3 speakers from California, 3 speakers from New York. Here in California, we're gonna hear from James, Barbara, and Nye. Each of them will speak separately, as impacted people who have served time in California state prisons, speaking to you around this issue. And then in New York, we also have folks who have been impacted in the New York prison system, who are also now doing work on the outside to help get people released and help change the system as we know it. So I really appreciate your ear. We will have questions and answers at the end of the call. So please, if there are questions that you are holding as folks are speaking, hold those tight. You can either send them on chat and we'll pay attention to them and call them out at the end of the call. Otherwise, we'll welcome you all at the end of the call to name those questions, and I'll read them out to folks so that our panelists can ask them. If they're specific to particular panelists, you can also name that. That way we can address those particular panelists in the question and answer portion of the call, and they can get to those answers as well. Also, at the end of the call, we would like to announce actions that we would have to follow, because obviously, we're leading this town hall to make sure that folks have information, to make sure that folks are in the know, but we also want to make sure that folks have actions to follow up. And so at the end of the call, we'll also be naming specific things so that folks can follow up and make sure that we're putting ourselves into action, even in our remote spaces, so that we can push our governors, Newsom and Cuomo, to grant clemencies and release people now. So to open up this panel, I'd like to welcome James King. James King is the state campaigner at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, one of my favorite CURB member organizations. Okay. And James King was released from prison about 4 months ago after serving a life sentence. So knows exactly what people are facing inside, knows exactly the fear that people are facing inside, especially in the midst of this pandemic, but also knows particularly the importance of not discriminating against folks who were convicted of violent offenses in their past, and can really speak to the importance of looking at people for who they are right now, right? And making sure that we're looking at this COVID-19 pandemic through a public health lens and releasing people accordingly. So I will hand over the microphone to James King.
Hello all. Amber Rose, thanks for that great introduction and setup. I'll begin by saying that solutions for mitigating the spread of coronavirus have laid bare just how dangerous America's systems of social inequity are, and just how interconnected we all are. Never before has the case been clearer that homelessness, It's not just a moral wrong, it's also a public health crisis. The same goes for medical care. We now know that nature itself refuses to respect the systems of inequality we have built. Going forward, it's essential to create solutions that provide safety and security for all. As broader society starts to understand social inequity in this public health crisis, one of the most dangerous yet hidden areas of vulnerability for all Americans is our addiction to incarceration. California alone, we have 35 adult prisons, 81 county and city jails, 4 federal detention centers. Physical distancing is impossible in every one of them. Our state is holding over 239,000 people in captivity as we speak. Add to that the numbers of tens of thousands of correctional officers and sheriff deputies who are entering and exiting those confined spaces every day. I should mention that correctional officer is one of the few decent paying jobs in California for people who only have a high school diploma. Though it probably feels dangerous for them to say anything publicly, we're also putting them and their family members at increased risk of infection because of our refusal to take adequate measures to release those most vulnerable. And our state's addiction to incarceration, our nation's addiction to incarceration, did not occur by accident. This state locked up tens of thousands of young Blacks and Latinx individuals during the height of the tough on crime decades of the 80s and 90s. Things like fashion choices were getting people labeled as gang members, which then resulted in 20-year sentencing enhancements. And just as willing as the state was to give out extraordinary sentences, like a friend of mine who received 210 years to life for a robbery, the state has been just as resistant to releasing them. On Monday, March 23rd, Governor Newsom gave a press conference where he was asked about releasing people in order to flatten the curve and reduce infection rates in California. He responded by stating he had no interest in releasing violent criminals. My heart dropped into my stomach. I just arrived home from prison about 4 months ago. I'm one of the fortunate few who had their sentences commuted by Governor Jerry Brown. I was also categorized as a violent offender. And as every other person I know who was commuted would say, I am not the exception, I'm a reflection. There are tens of thousands of people who I know are just as ready as I was to return to society. The problem is that the state's methodology of determining who is violent or nonviolent is deeply flawed when it comes to determining who to release. Though the California Department of Corrections has determined that the overwhelming majority of their elderly or those who have served over 10 years are the lowest risk for violence with the risk assessment algorithm they rely upon, California is still determining who is violent based upon the crime they were convicted of. In other words, a person who committed a single act of violence 20, 30, even 40 years ago, but hasn't committed any violent acts since, would still be categorized a violent offender. I think former Governor Jerry Brown said it best in a 2019 interview. There are literally thousands of people who have turned their lives around and are being kept in cages for no legitimate reason other than that's the law in California. We need to base accelerated releases on who people are today, not what they've done in their past. To do anything else puts us all at risk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. I think that's super important, the things that you highlighted, and I hope folks, if you have questions for James or other thoughts that pertaining to what James brought forward today, that you would hold them to the end or send them on the chat option so that we can ask James those questions moving forward. Next, we will have another speaker from California, Barbara Chavez, who is an organizer and a domestic violence advocate, also involved with Survived and Punished and the California Coalition for Women Prisoners and the Asian Prisoner Support Committee and the Asian Law Caucus. I think it's really important to hear from people who are who were inside, served over 20 years in prison and was granted clemency with the life without parole sentence in 2018. So Barbara Chavez, we are now handing over the mic to you.
Hi, everybody. Hello, everybody. Congratulations. So I was sentenced to the life without the possibility of parole. I was age 22 when the crime was committed. I served 20 years. Governor Brown, he commuted me in 2018. The violent crime that I was convicted of was for someone else's violence in the context of domestic violence. I'm here to say that everyone deserves a chance to survive this pandemic, regardless of conviction. I also want to say that the women's prisons are full of people like me who society deemed worthless, regardless of our actual role in violence. I was convicted under the felony murder rule. Mass clemency is not only possible, but it's good policy. And now it's more urgent than ever. We need clemencies for people at high risk. We need releases immediately for people who are elderly and high risk medical, such as Lainey Greenberger, who is an elderly woman who has been incarcerated for 30 years plus, barely in there making it. Ray Harris, who is has lupus and high risk medical. These people have served over 20 years, 30 years, and have did the time and put in the work. We need releases immediately. The conditions are already terrible in California prisons. The staff are already abusive. They sexually harass us. They are brutal to transgender people. The medical is terrible. The food is terrible, and the portion size have already dropped since this virus, putting high-risk people at risk even more. Our prisons are full of people serving life and life without parole, the possibility of parole sentences, warehousing people like me who have so much to give, so much to share. And they're putting elders at high risk medical, at risk of death. These are our community members, our partners, our mothers, our fathers, our daughters, our family members. In the face of death by incarceration, I was granted clemency. I'm here to make sure that we push our governor to grant more clemency now. Please, to help us make this happen. It's very dangerous right now. I am in contact with numerous people who are incarcerated, and they are scared for their lives. They don't have the PPEs. They don't have the things that we have here. So I just want to emphasize that we need to do what we have to do now, and we are pushing for our governor to make this happen. That's it.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Super important and really, really grateful to have you on. Again, you know, I think people should recognize that it's really important to have folks who have experienced time inside of cages, right? Inside of our prison cages and our state cages for decades, because we can only understand the impact that it has on lives, on human lives, if hearing from them. So we really, truly appreciate your voices and joining this call. Next up, we'll have Nye Norn. Nye served 16 years in prison and then turned around and had to serve 6 months in ICE detention. So I think what's really important in this moment is that we recognize, even as the governor is granting, 3,500 releases, which is 3,500 expedited paroles, right? Some of those folks will be held in ICE detention. Right now in the state of California, the GEO group has contracts and trying to hold space in empty jails and prisons so that they can hold ICE detainees. This will not help public safety. This will put the lives of people's lives in danger in the face of COVID-19. And I think Nye Norn can specifically speak to what that danger looks like and can specifically call out to our governors what they can do in order to avoid that crisis and to help save lives. Nye, the microphone is yours.
Hi, Amber. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Nia. I currently am a community advocate with Asian Law Caucus. I'm a member of the Asian Prisoner Court Committee, member of the Survivors Unpunished, and as well as CCWP member. And I think, it's really warming, and it's great, awesome to see advocates of public health working around the issue of the COVID crisis in response to our people that's doing state and jail and ICE detention time. We know the conditions were already worse before the COVID came around, and it's really odd to see in a way that that people are coming out more to say, you know what, we need to get our people out. And we heard the messaging, like James mentioned, that how Governor Newsom addressed that, violent offenders will not be out. There's that discrimination against people with convictions that are like 15, 20 years, that are decades old, and people that are aging right now is because due to tough sentencing laws back in the 80s and 90s, right? And they're still having to pay for it and being penalized for it because of that sentence, and they're not seen as, for their humanity and their worth, and that they are the population that is most likely to recidivate anyways, because they have family to go to, and they're at a stage in life is where they've noticed, having done time, what's important to them, and they want to be part of the community, and they are much more of the community. And I think especially those that have served time and went through this grueling parole process with the parole board as immigrants, even undocumented immigrants, they're punished twice, right? Like myself, after about 13 years, I didn't realize that I was facing deportation, and that goes to many, like the Latin community and Southeast Asian refugees that were funneled to these ICE detention facilities, and were in far worse conditions than what prisons are. Can you imagine those that are, when you were, if you did time in jail, you know what the conditions are like, small and cramped, and you have no legal access to attorneys. So now detention is indefinite. You're not getting out unless you win your case, unless you self-deport. There's women that I know inside that says, you know what, I can't do 2 more years of this. I'm going to self-deport because I'd rather take my chances of being, of losing my life in another country, or trying to flee back just to find that safety. And we have to bring in the, the immigrants discussion as well, because they are part of the community and their families. California has 11 million immigrants. And those immigrants, they have loved ones that are incarcerated, that are in jails, that need to be supported as well. The stimulus is great, but what about our undocumented communities, right? And we know that in ICE detention facilities, that the medical, that the healthcare is, there's been documentations that it's very devastating, and ICE the staff has been tested positive, and they're not being open and honest with us. So there's just shifting bodies inside around right now. There's a few community members I know that right now they have serious health conditions, but yet they say that they can't let them out, because they have final order removal, but then they can't. That there are other alternatives, as well as releasing those that are in state prisons. And I think this calls to challenging the governor himself, Governor Newsom. What can you do to help not just reduce the prison population side, but also we challenge you, are you willing to say that you're this progressive leader, right? You signed 25 criminal justice reform bills. You say you halted executions in the state of California, and you want to end juvenile imprisonment in California by working on criminal justice reform bills. And recently you granted 21 commutations, and been over 2 dozen commutations and a handful of pardons. That's great, but that's not enough. That is not enough. And you're releasing 3,500 that have, 60, 90 days, nonviolent offenses? What about those that are higher risk that have violent offenses? But so what? What does their offense have anything to do whatsoever about their health is just as valuable as our communities out here. And I want to challenge the governor to that, and also challenge you as governor. There's no saying that you have to work with ICE. Can we count on you to not use state resources to cooperate with ICE, to not communicate with them, to say that let immigrant parole from prison. Let them have a better chance of fighting their case instead of putting them in worse conditions, especially around this COVID crisis. Like, do you really want to help contribute to the increase of the ICE detention facility and to sentence them to death? Because that's what you're doing. You're going to sentence them to die in ICE detention. No, clearly there's no argument about that, because they're more highly susceptible to get to the COVID.
Thank you, so much. That is super important, I think, to make that connection. Again, California has so many, like such a large immigrant population. I think the same is true for New York. And so to make sure that we're making those connections between what's happening in our state prison systems and our immigration detention is important. You know, nobody is safe in a cage right now. You know, we already have known before COVID-19 hit the United States that you can't get well in a cell. And so obviously that is even more urgent to recognize at this point. So thank you so much for that. We have a few questions that are rolling in for you, as well as the speakers who preceded you. And I think we will get to those questions at the end after each panelist presents. But now we will move over to the panelists in New York, and we will talk about the state of New York. And I'm not sure if many of you all have been following what's going on in New York, but New York is the epicenter of COVID-19 cases right now. You know, we obviously, California is a nation state. We have a huge population. We have 35 prisons, almost, 200,000 people under the watch of CDCR, but about 123,000 people who are in prisons or in some capacity of a cage in the state of California. And New York is also dealing with a huge problem there. So many people have already died in custody. Jose Saldana is our next panelist, who is the director of Release Aging People in Prison in New York. Jose has served 38 years in prison. Jose is still connected to so many friends, mentors, and people inside who are right now in the fear in the face of this crisis. Jose, the microphone is turned over to you. Please tell us what's going on in New York and what we all need to know about what we should be doing in order to prevent people from dying.
Let me first begin briefly by telling you that RAPP evolved from a crisis. And this crisis was created by mass incarceration. And it's the same crisis that other states experienced for decades. In New York State, 675 elder people have passed away in the last 9 to 10 years. And the average age of death is 58 years old. Now that is a crisis. That is a health crisis if there isn't any. Now, I just want to say that right now, I did 38 years. Most of our members are formerly incarcerated, and Mark, 30 years. Anthony, 33 years. Conrad Don, 35 years. So we come out of prison knowing that we left people behind who were just as worthy to be walking out with us, but in all likelihood would die, especially at this moment. In this particular moment is no time to be chucking and jiving and thinking that our governor is going to grant anybody clemency without being pushed to do so. So RAPP, in collaboration with Parole Prep, have prepared a humane solution for this crisis that we know that once this crisis hits New York State prisons, and New York State prisons, like other prisons, are breeding grounds for this virus. And once this virus hits, it's going to kill people. And it's going to kill people that we left behind, people that we know. So we're not just talking about numbers here. So our first solution, and it's a humanitarian solution, it's the only solution to stop the spread of this virus and stop the death that this virus is going to leave behind in New York State prisons. And this is mass incarceration. Mass clemencies. We're talking about mass clemencies. Mass incarceration created this conditions that we found ourselves in for the last 4 or 5 decades. Mass clemencies is the only solution to this. The governor has to grant mass clemencies without any consideration to the crime of conviction or the length of sentence. And we're talking about the mass clemencies that should be initiated by the elderly who have the most serious underlying health conditions and all those who also have health conditions. And just go on down the line and releasing people without no temporary releases, no furloughs. We want people to be released, return back to their home communities and their families without any conditions whatsoever. And the second part of this solution is maximize parole release process. That means that anybody who is parole eligible, that you've already been to your parole board, that these persons should be released immediately because they've been unjustly denied, been denied parole for decades, and in some cases 2 decades. And those whose parole dates are about to appear, they're about to appear before their first parole board within 18 months or 2 years. Expedite this, advance it so that they have the opportunity to return back to their family and home communities. And this is the only way to decarcerate, to minimize the spread of this deadly virus that will not only kill people in our prisons, but people all over the prison systems of the United States. So we are collaborating with anybody who values human life that's incarcerated and does not exclude anybody from this justice, this humane justice. Because we say that throughout history, we have been excluded from just about everything in the United States. Voting rights, opportunities for education, housing, medical, every single basic human right we've been excluded from. Every opportunity to advance we've been excluded from, and we fought for everything that we have today. So we, RAPP, cannot turn around and exclude people. We are dealing with a pandemic that is deadly, and it's proven deadly to our people, not just the elderly and those with underlying health problems, but it's proven deadly to our people. And we know the virus is not racist. It's the people that create the conditions that we live in that are racist. So we cannot exclude anybody who's been victimized by this capitalist system of oppression based on the nature of a crime or the length of sentence. And we join y'all on the West Coast on this. We collaborate. Let's get both of these governors, get them off their ass, and have them start using the executive clemency powers to start releasing men and women across the country from California to New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose. Super important, the things that you spoke to. I think particularly thinking about the fact that, you know, obviously this has been a crisis long before COVID-19. Like incarceration is the crisis, right? And this is all exacerbated because of this new pandemic that we're dealing with. But obviously folks have already served decades in prison. And folks should not be looked at as what they were convicted of, you know, 20, 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago. We have to look at this through a public health lens and make sure that we're releasing people and looking at them for who they are right now. I think that's super important to mention. You know, we have, you know, Governor Newsom and Governor Cuomo positioning themselves as progressive leaders. And in this crisis that we're in, they will not be named in history as progressive leaders if they don't release people. We need to be granting clemencies to folks. We need to be releasing folks. We have over 30,000 people in the state of California who are over the age of 50 years old, you know, who are not being counted for clemencies right now. New York, there are tens of thousands of folks who could be counted for clemency right now and are being overlooked. So that's super important to mention. Thank you so much, James. Next up, we will have Donna Robinson speak from the Western New York Regional. She's a Western New York regional organizer, also a part of Release Aging People in Prison campaign. Donna's daughter is also serving a life sentence in New York. You know, so I think it is truly important to hear from Donna. Donna, the microphone is being turned over to you.
Thank you so much, Amber Rose. Yes, as you stated, my daughter serving a 15 to life sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. For those of you that don't know, there are 3 women's facilities in the state of New York. Bedford Hills is a maximum. facility for women across the road, literally. There's Taconic, which is a medium security facility. And up here in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, where I reside, is Albion in correctional facility, I should say. And that's a medium security facility for women. I became involved with RAPP basically from doing activism work in Buffalo with different organizations. I started out with Prisoners of People 2. They connected me with release aging people in prison. I started to advocate for different organizations. Another one near and dear to my heart is HALT, Cake Solitary Confinement. And I'm speaking for people who cannot speak for themselves. You know, my daughter's 44 years old. She has a heart condition. She had a stroke in 2010, had heart surgery in 2012. The mother of 4 and a grandmother of 2. You forget about people who are incarcerated. And I think that we especially forget about women, because that's not usually the norm in the population that is incarcerated. But for whatever reason, women find themselves subject to being institutionalized, demoralized, mistreated, abused. It's a travesty what's happening in the state of New York, especially when I turn on my TV every day between 11 and 11:30, and I see Governor Cuomo having one of his little fireside chats. His chest is stuck out, and he's talking about what he can do to save New Yorkers' lives in this pandemic. But when you ask him, what are you going to do about people who are incarcerated, which in the 52 prisons in New York State alone, there's hundreds of thousands of our loved ones. He says, it's not an issue. When it becomes an issue, I'll address it. Or I don't plan on doing anything about it. That's a sad and poor excuse for a leader. If you don't care about our loved ones, we're not going to care about you. That's just the bottom line. You've had clemency orders on your desk for a couple years now. You think that if you let a couple people go, that's doing a great thing, right? No. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's time that you started doing what you should have done before this outbreak. It was no secret to people who are incarcerated that they were not going to get medical care. And the case in point, and I always refer back to Ms. Valerie Gator, the longest serving woman in the state of New York, 41 years. She was incarcerated, not eligible for parole until she had reached her 50th year. Unfortunately, she was given 2 life sentences. And we understand that people commit crimes. I'm not about this non-violent, violent. I'm about looking at everyone who they are now. If you have any ounce of compassion or God in your life, it's only right that you show compassion to your fellow man. We don't know under what circumstances that we could end up. It's so easy. Like my daughter said, Mommy, it only took a split second to make a bad decision and ruin the rest of my life. She's been given a life sentence. My daughter was not given 15 years to death at her sentence. And I get so upset when the world keeps revolving and nobody's thinking about the ones who can't speak for themselves. So I made it my business when Miss Valerie Gator passed away August 13th in Bedford Hills from cancer of the esophagus after complaining for a couple years. And they telling her, oh, you have acid reflux, take a Tylenol. That I know that in this crisis, they don't have any medical treatment. And my biggest fear right now, aside from the fact that I can't visit my daughter, that she can't call me as much as I would like to hear from her, but my biggest fear is that they are going to use these drugs that they are working on our loved ones behind bars as guinea pigs. We cannot let that happen. And if you don't care about the prisoners, Governor Cuomo, you don't care about incarcerated people, Governor Cuomo, give a damn about the people that work coming in and out of those institutions all day. Some of them are volunteering. The officers, they might be bringing home a 6-figure salary, but at the end of the day, when that casket's closed, I've never seen a Brinks truck following a hearse. People need PPE, personal protective equipment behind bars. You have them making hand sanitizer, but they can't use it because it's contraband. And the latest insult, you have them digging graves. $6 an hour to dig your own grave. You have them making coffins? I don't know what the world is coming to other than destruction. But I think you're steering the boat right now, Cuomo. And Newsom, oh, I'm not letting you off the hook either. Clemency now, clemency coast to coast, no carve-outs, because all of this, oh, furlough, temporary release, WTF is that? You've already oppressed people who are already oppressed. Oppression on top of oppression equals destruction. This is not the America that I want to leave as a legacy to my great-grandchildren, to my ancestors after I'm gone. Because I'm one of these immunocompromised people who is using my good common sense to stay sheltered as much as possible. And if I have to go out covered up from head to toe. Because if something happens to me, nobody's gonna care about my daughter and her 4 children and 2 grandchildren. I already know that. You said it, and you're showing me every day. And it's getting worse and worse. So if you were gonna do anything, March 24th, when all of this brouhaha came about, that was 2 weeks ago. You need to do something today, now. Thank you. So pissed. So pissed.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We pissed with you. Seriously, we totally feel you on that. Everything that you said is totally true and rings true with us at CURB, with folks at RAPP, with folks at CCWP. We literally don't need to be looking at people for what they were convicted of at the time that they were in court, but we need to be looking at people for who they are right now. People have worked very hard to transform their lives, just as they do on the outside. And I think that's what the governors are failing to recognize. You definitely don't need to be put in a cage in order to do that kind of transformation. And we don't need to overlook the fact that people who are in cages can still be responsible for that kind of transformation. It is a human transformation, right? And all of us are human beings. And so definitely thank you, Donna, for your perspective there. We are all as angry as you are, and really, really urging our governors to grant clemencies. We need people to be released. Folks should not be sentenced to die in prison in this pandemic. The next speaker that we have is Teresa Grady. community leader, a Release Aging People in Prison campaign. Teresa's husband is an elder in New York State prison serving a 40-year sentence. Teresa, the microphone is turned over to you.
Thank you, Amber Rose. Good evening, all. Yes, my husband is in Green Haven, facing 40 years. He's on 15 now, down. My husband has underlying ailments that coronavirus would attack him, okay? He's there now worrying because where he's at, his unit or whatever they call that, they're removing people day by day that's sick with it, but not telling the rest that it is that. Oh no, they just got the virus. Well, what virus they got other than corona? They emptied a whole entire section to make a quarantine. Okay, we need for Governor Cuomo and California's governor to understand. You have elders that are sick that need to be released, not temporarily released, but released permanently. The fact that he sits there every day and he's acting like these people don't exist. Where my husband is right now in Green Haven, I don't know about the whole entire facility, but I do know where he's at. They're not even giving them bleach water to clean down their cells. So how do they keep themselves safe, you know? A couple of days ago, my husband kind of had me on a scare. And then he says to me, I'm not going to medical. I'm not going to this. And he needs to be going to medical. Okay, he needs to. He's a diabetic. He has issues with his kidneys. You know, he's asthmatic. All of these are part of the symptoms that corona can attack. I sat home and worried because I know I have underlying. But my biggest issue and my biggest worry on the daily is this, if he's going to be okay. And if Governor Cuomo is sitting there, what he got, death camps now? Because that's what's going to happen. In all 52 of New York State prisons, we're going to have death camps. It's going to be like Hitler again. And I think that's sad. I think it's wrong. I think him and Governor Newsom should look at the books and wonder if they want to have that kind of blood on their hand. You're going to have these people, you already have these people digging graves for themselves. You know, you don't care what we're going through. You don't care about them. We're going to all start hearing death camp. Oh, you already had one that just died in Sing Sing. Wasn't even supposed to have been like that. That's not how that man's supposed to end up. And the young man that died in Rikers Island, he was in a what was it? It wasn't even a real violation, they said. It was a violation that he should have gotten released on. Instead, he died. Died in a hospital that the family couldn't even go to. This is what we're facing in New York City, in the state of New York, and I'm quite sure it's happening in California. These governors need to wake up because they are not about these prisoners. I know they're not about my husband and a million other men and women. They're not about them, and they need to clear that up. They need to do it now. They need to let them go. I say they need to do clemency right now. Free these people, let them out of them prisons, because what are you going to do with them when they're dead? You're not even going to be able to send them home to us. So why not let them go before they die? As you said, my husband is 65 years old. By the time he do his 40 years, he's going to be dead anyway if he stay in there. So what's the difference? Let them out now. Let them go. Free these people. The jails are not properly taken care of. They got what they call it, okay, their COs are walking around and they are not fully protected. They are not all wearing PPE. They are not. I mean, my husband tells me this is why he won't go to medical, because the people that's going to give him his medicine is not properly in gear, meaning a mask and gloves. I don't blame him for that. But at the same time, I have to worry and tell him you have to go to medical. This is your survival, okay? But I'm like Donna, we don't know what they're going to be giving them. because we can't go see them. So my worry is, and what I really want is clemency now. I want these governors to release these people. The elder needs to be released. Don't matter if it's man or woman, they need to be released. And I'm going to continue fighting until we get them home. Because Governor Cuomo, if that be the case, you carrying blood on your head, you're carrying families that's going to be on your back. Y'all are going to face a lot. And I'm just wanting to say, let them go. And thank you. Thank you. Ooh, where we went.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Totally agree with everything you said, and it all resonates. I mean, you know, there's an urgency for our governors to listen to us and to allow people to come home. I think every speaker that has been on panel today has reiterated the fact that, you know, people have places to come home to. There are literally family members. There are wives, there are husbands, there are daughters, there are sons. There are people waiting to have their community member, waiting to have the people who are in prison come home to them. So the question of where will people go if we release them? They'll go home. They'll return to their communities. They will return to people who really care for them and who are prepared to help them integrate into society and to become become a member of their community once again. And so I think that question that folks are throwing out there is not fair. And I think we have to focus on the reality that there are families and community members who are able to accept people home. We cannot discriminate against folks because of their conviction types. We have to really look at this through the lens of public safety. And we have to recognize that people are, you know, that this crisis existed way before COVID-19, right? And it's time for us to allow folks to return to their communities. Please, Governor Newsom, Governor Cuomo, grant vast clemencies. Literally, lives are in your hands. While people are dying inside of prisons, and that rate is growing. Every single day, we're hearing of new cases of people dying in prisons. Are you all really going to sit up and allow those deaths to be on your hands? In the state of California, Governor Newsom announced a moratorium on the death penalty, saying that it is unlawful, that is inhumane to sentence people to die in prison. How then are we going to allow people to die in prison because of this pandemic? If we're going to hold true to that moratorium on the death penalty, then we have to hold true to not allowing people to die in prison during this pandemic. We have a few questions that were brought forward to panelists. So I'm going to begin to read off some of the questions, and then I'll hand it off to panelists to answer. First question here. What can we do for our loved ones in prisons to help them get masks to protect themselves from the virus? So to any of the panelists, do you have an answer for anything that folks can do inside to protect themselves? We obviously know that prisons are overcrowded. We obviously know that folks are sleeping arm distance lengths from each other, right? In some of the dorms. So what can people actually do to protect themselves while they are inside waiting for release?
Hello, this is Jose from RAPP. Right now, as it stands, it's illegal to wear a mask in New York State prison system. What we as a community can do is we can make demands on Governor Cuomo, because he can change this policy. He can just make a phone call and tell all the superintendents, issue out an executive order, all the superintendents to allow masks to be worn by incarcerated men and women. He did this with the hand sanitizers. He had men and women making hand sanitizers that they could not use themselves, that it was contraband for them to possess. So behind us advocating on behalf of those incarcerated, the community expressing their outrage that incarcerated people are working for pennies making hand sanitizers that they cannot use, that's when they change the policy. we have to become proactive, and we have to unite as a community and demand that these changes be made in the state prison system to at least help the incarcerated people not get infected by this virus.
Also, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, CCWP, put out a demand letter to CDCR headquarters on Monday to them, and that they lift the ban on face masks and provide them. Today, they started allowing people to wear masks at CIW, but the problem is they're not providing them, so it's important to push for both at the same time. And just be creative, because when you're in that mode and you're in survival mode and your creativity, innovative skills kick in. So have them make self masks and just continue to wash hands. Like I'm telling them to do that. And we just have to push for them to, okay, they're saying it's okay, we'll start issuing them.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Jose, for those answers. The next question that we have up, this is for James King in particular at the Ella Baker Center. And maybe others will obviously have something to chime in on. The question is, we know social distance is impossible in California prisons. Can you discuss the size of the cells and what people can do to help themselves in those situations?
Sure. California state prisons, the sizes of the cells vary according to when the facility was built. So for instance, San Quentin State Prison, which is one of the, if not the oldest prison that's still active today, the cells are 4 feet wide by 9 feet long. Within that, you have 2 bunks, you have a sink and a toilet. So from the front of the cell to the back of the cell is 9 feet in space. And just assuming one person was standing at the front and the back in order to be socially distant or physically distant from each other, then that person who was at the front of the cell would be right next to the bars, and then exposed to everyone who walked by the cell. In California state prisons, the prisons, each prison, regardless of the size of and the spatial dimensions, the prisons are technically at 137.5% capacity as a whole. In practicality, some places are close to 200% capacity, others are right at 100% capacity. And one thing that is important to know about that is when the living conditions are at 150, 200% capacity, that means that the phones that they share to call out to their loved ones are at that capacity as well. That means that the showers that they have access to are at 150, 200% capacity. In fact, they do releases in every prison in our state, which are timed for showers, and the goal is to give people 5-minute showers, meaning that they will let 50 people out to access 8 showers and give them half an hour so that they all, and then they're asked to manage that. I also wanted to touch on the earlier question. One piece of advice that I've been giving a lot of people on the inside is, as it relates to keeping yourself safe in there, it's important to stay as far away from staff as possible. That's how it's going to come in. That's how it is already coming in. That is where the most physical distancing is needed. After any interaction, make sure you ask your loved ones to do everything they can to sanitize afterwards as well. Thank you.
I'd like to just add to that. In New York, there is no social distancing. The CDC just put out that the virus can be spread just by talking. I just got 3 emails from state prisons, maximum state prisons. People are sick all over the place. 5, 6 people are sick. The next day, it's 25. The virus is already there. There are no more preventive measures. The only solution right now is to get people out of jail before people start dying. And I think that should be our focus right now. Prisons are breeding grounds for this virus. They didn't prepare, so now it's too late. It's too late now to make all these preparations. It's good for a person. You're gonna stay in your cell, put a mask on. I would, if I was in my cell right now, I'll put a mask on. And if I was to come out, I'll put the mask. If I can't put the mask on, I won't come out. I would try to guard my health like that. But we, as a community, have to come together to get people out of prison because they're already sick. And no mask is going to save those who are already sick.
Thank you so much, Jose, for that comment and for saying that. You know, I'm feeling the same way. Like, listen, the only thing that is going to save lives is releasing people, letting them go home. Ain't no mask, ain't no hand sanitizer, ain't no hand soap, ain't none of that finna help nobody. We need them to release people immediately. We need clemency right now. So thank you for, you know, driving that point home. You know, the next question that we have is, you know, someone says, governors are not going to release incarcerated people unless they are forced to. Can we look at filing a lawsuit? So, you know, we'll ask for, you know, New York panelists to answer that question, but I do want to reiterate here that in California, there has been lawsuits filed. A 3-judge panel said just a couple of days ago that, hey, we cannot force California to release people from prison in the face of COVID-19. Wow, right? There's nothing that the courts can do, but they did push forward the point that, hey, Governor Newsom needs to do something very drastic. They did accentuate the fact that, you know, unless people are released, people will definitely die in prison. So is there something happening in New York around a lawsuit that would allow people to be released? What do New Yorkers think of?
The lawsuits are being filed for individuals, not class actions that I'm aware of. And I think these lawsuits have validity, but what judge is really going to release someone based on someone being ill and the possibility or the probability that they will die if they are infected by this virus? It may work for some, but I wouldn't put too much faith in the legal system doing this. I think that we have to put the governor to do this. We have to pressure the Department of Corrections to maximize parole releases. This is, you know, 2 or 3 people getting out of prison doesn't solve the big issue. The issue is, man, that New York State prisons, like other prisons across the country, are going to be transformed into death camps if we don't start decarceration.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you very much for your response there. You know, people are really wondering, and this isn't a question that folks have to answer, but I think people are really concerned, like, does Governor Cuomo even hear folks? Does, you know, Governor Newsom even hear folks? So folks are wondering, you know, does letters from folks actually matter? Does phone calls matter? And I would respond to that question to say, yes, they do. You know, although we may not see the response that we need to see from those governors in order to see the folks released that we need, you know, our advocacy matters. If we are quiet, they will let people die, and it will never be mentioned in history. It will never be mentioned in history if we stay silent. We must continue to raise our voices. We must continue to flood their offices with calls. We must continue to flood their inboxes with emails. Right now, we're not able to mobilize to their buildings, but we must continue to lift our voices. That way, at least, when they let our people die, it will be documented in history that we did not stay silent and that we did everything that we could to get our elected officials who claim to be progressive, right, who are representing us as constituents. It will be documented that we said, do not let this happen. So to those of you who are wondering, should we continue to write letters? Should we continue to make calls? The answer is absolutely. Never stop. The next question that we have is for Donna. The question is, what facility are they making coffins in? And is that a core craft assignment?
Where they have carpentry in some of the facilities, not only in New York State, but according to the Marshall Report, in places like Louisiana, Kentucky, they have a carpentry program and they have people making coffins, which to me is asinine, because in a pandemic such as this, it would behoove them to start to cremate people. We wouldn't think that they would have people out digging graves in New York City, right outside of Rikers Island. It's called Hart Island. But they're out there digging mass graves. They know that this is a pandemic that's going to spiral out of control. But the way that they are going about it and attacking it is ass backwards.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna. I'll read off the next question that we have for folks. Folks are saying, we are learning that Black and Latinx people are dying from COVID-19 at the highest rate all across the country. So California and New York. How will this be reflected in prisons? And I think it's particularly important for you all on the panel to chime in on this, because you have been there. You have people who are there right now. And I think one of the most important things for us to realize about the prison industrial complex is that it is built on white supremacy and patriarchy, right? It is a racist system. So please answer the question, how will this reflect in prison?
Well, when this pandemic first reared its ugly head, I would think that it would happen like in 2019. I go so far back as saying September, October. They are playing fast and loose with a lot of people's lives, first and foremost. I don't see how this is going to turn out well for anyone, especially the African American and the Latino people of color, because they are the ones who populate these facilities. I thought that maybe this was some type of backdoor way to eradicate a race of people, to control the population, to control the economy. They look at it like, well, we can't lock all of them up, so let's try and unleash this virus to take the rest of them out. A lot of lives are going to be lost, and it doesn't even matter what color they are. It's the fact that it's a human life, first of all. They have a lot of platforms, Save the Whales and the ASPCA. You care about animals, but you don't care about human beings. I'm perplexed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Totally hear everything that you're saying, Donna, and that resonates with me. Do other panelists have a response to the question of how will this pandemic affect people inside who are Black and Latinx?
Well, in New York, Jose, in New York, the vast majority of those incarcerated is people of color. So these are the people, when this thing hits, if Governor Cuomo fails to act, if he fails to make the right humanitarian decision and leaves people to die in there, the ones who are going to be dying is going to be the people of color. The communities that are going to be devastated by this catastrophe are the communities of color. This is just a basic reality for us that we face in America. This pandemic has exposed everything that is wrong with this society. And we can't make a bandage approach to this. We have to change this system from the bottom all the way up to the top. This here should never happen again. We all should be prepared to address this pandemic, as opposed to allowing those in authority, in a leadership role, who don't have our interests at heart at all, allowing them to lead us into a death camp.
I would add to that, in the 1980s, the 1990s, and on through the 2000s, mass criminalization devastated communities of color. It devastated Black and Latinx communities from coast to coast. Right now, in this state, when you walk the prison yards, the vast majority of people are people of color, and each one of those people have loved ones on the outside who are just rocked with concern and care for their loved ones. So it's touching both inside and outside communities of colors in such a way that as the numbers increase in California prisons and in prisons throughout the state, it will adversely affect communities of color or people of color to an even greater degree than it's doing outside right now, because the numbers are much more disproportionate inside than they are out here. So if it's affecting LA and Blacks are being more adversely affected in Los Angeles right now, and Blacks make up maybe 8 or 9% of Los Angeles's population, you can imagine what it's doing when it's 40% of the prison population. Thank you.
Thank you so much, each of you who responded to that question. And I think it's really important to recognize, that in a state like California, there is more racial discrimination in our criminal legal system than there is in Mississippi. We have more Black folks locked up in the state of California than we do in Mississippi compared to the population, right? So definitely, this will affect Black and brown folks more than anyone. And so thank you for answering that question and for highlighting that fact to folks. The next question we have, and I think is rather important. Has there been any effort to reach out to corrections officers' unions to see if at this time they would support the call for clemency, or failing that, increase protective equipment for guards and incarcerated people? I'd love to hear answers from panelists on that. I don't fuck with the police, and all y'all know that. I'm not very good at working with the cops or CDCR. I feel like they do not align with our values, and it's very difficult for me personally. But in our advocacy, we have many partners who are really good at working with CDCR, who are really good at working with corrections officers and their unions in order to help pair them in with our advocacy. So, do you all have answers for if there's been any outreach or any efforts to connect with folks in corrections around the urgency to grant clemencies right now?
Let me first say that the Correction Officers Union, they fought for correction officers to wear masks in the prison system. They didn't fight for the incarcerated men and women to wear masks. So their interests are not like our interests. And the fact is that law enforcement are complicit in mass incarceration. They all have a vested interest. This is their job. Without incarcerating people of color, they'll be milking cows. And I'm with you, Amber Rose. I just don't, I don't have a good relationship with them. I can't sit down and have a conversation over coffee. If I thought that some of them would actually, individually, some may actually support us, at least philosophically. But they will never oppose their leadership in support of us. They could have very well fought for everyone in prison to have masks, but they didn't. They just looked out for their own interests and the hell with everybody else.
In California state prisons, and I'm sure prisons throughout the nation, it's relying upon correction officers creating a culture that sees people as incarcerated, as less than, as all of the labels, all of the dehumanizing labels that they can come up with in order to justify and make it through an 8-hour shift. You cannot treat people the way that prisons treat people if you see them as your peers or humans or put family members, loved ones, or people from your community. You just can't do it and live with yourself. So the culture is built for them to not see you as a human and as an individual. And even in moments like this, when it works against the worker's best interest, that's hard for them to break through. The one thing that I would point out is in California state prisons, the leadership level, they're all working remotely. They're working from home. They're not going into anywhere, and they're not at risk. It's the workers who are the working class who is being subjected to going out and being exposed to this and exposing our loved ones to this. And white supremacy makes victims of them as well, because they cannot then rise up against the patriarchy that is devastating them. They just don't have the insight, the fiber, or the courage to do so and speak against what they think are their own best interests. I wish this would be an opportunity where they could speak out and one or two brave individuals could say, look, this policy is putting us at risk, but I don't see any courage from their ranks just yet.
Thank you so much, Dave.
I
see Teresa.
Rosa. I just want to say something. I have two friends that are New York State correctional officers. One in particular, her son, this is his second time around in prison. And I had to ask her the other day, what's her feeling? How she feel about the fact that your son is in there, he's doing 10 years, and you can't give him a mask nor a pair of gloves, and you're a correctional officer. What's your thoughts and your feeling about it? Because you guys, y'all play this game of, when I'm here, I'm a correctional officer. I'm straight with the book. When you're outside, you're someone else. But you can't deal with the public because you see us all the time, especially in New York State. Most of the CEOs that are in a lower hub live within our areas. So when you see us, my thing is, how you feel about it? You can't even say hi because now you done treated us and our loved ones less than. You're not treating them equal. There's no way. So when you see, let's say me on the streets, you know who I am. You recognize my face. You know I'm always in Greenhaven. You can't talk to me as a human on one-on-one because everything in your head is, oh, I know her from the prison. Oh, I dehumanize her husband and others on a daily basis. That's so I can survive in the correctional officers, division. And they have leaders that really teaches them, care less about the people and worry more about your partners, your co-workers. Don't make yourself available in any shape, form, or fashion. This is sad because, they have to face a lot of criticism when they speak out. So, no, they're not going to speak out. And if they speak about anything, they're going to speak about them. You understand what I'm saying? They're going to talk about what can be done for them. Nothing for the inmate, nothing, but everything about them. So I don't see them being right about the inmates. They're never going to do that, no matter what happens. So, to be dehumanized, the way that they do them, the way that they I call it taking their souls away. And it's so sad. And I don't know what we could do except for keep fighting for them. That's all I have to say about that. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and others of you who responded to the question. And I think it's so important, we don't want anyone to die, right? In the era of this pandemic. But obviously, again, as advocates against the prison industrial complex for decades and years, many of us realize that people who are on, who are employed by and or work, in close ties with the corrections departments don't see things our way, and they are not advocating for our people. So I think that, you know, some of us may have opportunities to connect with people who work for corrections, but others of us realize that, yo, it's on us. We have to be the ones to stand in the gaps for our people. We cannot depend on corrections departments to do that for us. So, you know, thank you so much for those responses. Another good question that we have, and we have just a few minutes before we end the town hall. But I think another question that we have is, someone says, in addition to petitions and calls to the governors, how would panelists feel about conducting civil disobedience, protesting in front of governors' offices, in person, keeping distance less than 6 feet, of course, to make a point of people crowded in cells? I think this might get the attention of the news and media if they saw us denying the stay-at-home order and showing that we are together. So what do folks feel, you know, what do folks on the panel feel about right now denying stay-at-home orders in order to advocate for our folks who are in prison, who necessarily cannot meet those kind of social restrictions?
I'm with it. I'm with it 100%. I experienced what I experienced for a reason, and I have to fight, and I'm going to fight. I'm with it.
Yeah, I like, this is new. I like Barbara, I'm down for a good protest and a rally. And as many protests and rallies that have been ICE detentions, folks have been camped out at Newsom's home already. I think he'd be highly embarrassed if he does threaten arrest or the local police do so. And we know that Newsom loves attention, media attention, because he does have political aspirations to be president one day. We know this. That's why he's being careful what he say or do. But he needs that pressure, and pressure, I think, to get like journalists out there and media. I think he would have to respond to it and do something besides responding to the lawsuit.
Okay, this is Jose from RAPP. We just had a press conference outside Sing Sing, right outside the wall, because that was the first person that died of a COVID infection was in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. So we thought that we would go out there, and it was about 30 of us. You know, we maintained social distancing, and we had wore masks and gloves. But we thought that it was absolutely necessary for us to do this. It was the first death in prison. It means a lot to us because, you know, the first person to die of this virus was in Seattle, Washington, and now we have close to 13,000 deaths. So this is how it begins. And we just wanted to draw attention to this fact that, you know, and it was the person of color too. So this is definitely on the table for us. We have to be careful about things like this because as it becomes more of a law, you know, a lot of us are on parole, and any contact with police brings us back. You know, so we have to be very careful with that. But I love it.
Right on, right on. Totally agree. It's necessary for us to continue to move in the ways that we move. We're advocates and we're activists and we're fighting for people who can't speak up for themselves. So, you know, it's gonna take sacrifice, you know, and it's dangerous, and it always has been dangerous. When we look past, like when we look to the past, when people were, you know, advocating for the liberation of Black people and other people, Black, brown, indigenous, Native, and other people of color in the United States, it was dangerous. You know what I'm saying? People are out there risking their lives all the time for the liberation of our people. So if you asking me, if you're asking Jose, you know, other folks on this panel, of course we're here for it. We think that, yes, if you are someone who is in the position to and willing to step forward and bring forward that sacrifice in order to advocate for folks inside who can't speak for themselves, let's do that shit, right? So we're here for it. But also, yes, let's be careful and let's take care of one another. Let's make sure that we do everything we can on the outside, but we're speaking for people who do not have a voice out here. You know, so that's very important for us. You know, we got to put our necks on the line you know, and I think a lot of us are already dedicated to that. And we appreciate you and we love you and we're all here for each other. You know, I think it's also important to recognize that, you know, as we're doing this and we're all trying to adjust to different kinds of advocacy, to keep in touch with one another. That's the purpose for us creating this sort of clemency coast to coast action where we have people in California and way on the other side of the United States in New York joining together, because we are trying to get people to realize in this moment where social distancing and isolation is being promoted, we're trying to promote solidarity. We're trying to promote unity. We want people to get on board all in unison to require and demand clemency coast to coast. You know, that's what's really important here. There's a question that came through on that says, you know, are there plans underway to organize car caravans demanding freedom off from Albany to Sacramento to draw attention to the serious situation faced by incarcerated people? There are definitely actions happening. We're going to announce a few things that will be happening online in the next couple of minutes at the end of this call, but also, you know, follow Release Aging People in Prison on Twitter. Follow California Coalition for Women Prisoners. Follow CURB. Follow the Parole Preparation Project, as we will continue to announce actions that are happening in our states where people are getting out there, making the sacrifice and calling for the release and clemencies of people in our state prison systems. You know, one thing that you can look out for sure is, and you know, many of you all participated last week. We had Clemency Coast to Coast on Twitter. Thousands of people participated. We were trending on Twitter, Clemency Coast to Coast. Lots of selfies going around, beautiful people and their dogs and their cats and their children, and everybody calling for clemency coast to coast, calling the offices of Governor Newsom and Governor Cuomo to release people. We're going to have a follow-up to that this Friday, okay? This Friday, we will be releasing the toolkit so that you all can participate in this action tomorrow, so that you all can participate on Friday, April 10th, to continue to help us push forward. I think you all see Nia's beautiful photo here. Governor Newsom, Governor Cuomo, let them go. Clemency coast to coast. You know, that's what we're promoting here. And we'll have a new toolkit that comes out with tweets, you know, template language for you all to send tweets to our governors. You know, and as these things are trending, I think we can get a reaction from our governors. And we will continue to plan forward. This is not the end, right? Every day, those of us who are in California and New York are trying our very best to gather more support in urging our governors to let people go. So please make sure that you keep an eye out from emails from myself, Colby Lenz at California Coalition for Women Prisoners, Dave George, Jose Saldana, who's on the panel today, Brian Caneda from CURB. You will be getting emails from each of us so that you can participate in actions that we are setting up and we are moving forward to call for clemency coast to coast. One last thing that I'll say to you all, I think what's really important about the conversation today is that we realize lots of people are demanding the release of folks, right? But if we settle for the release of people who were convicted of low-level offenses, if we settle for only the releases of people who have non-violent, non-serious, non-sexual crimes or offenses, we'll get nowhere. In California, we need at least 50,000 people released in order to address this. But we have 123,000 people incarcerated in CDCR. 3,500 people ain't doing shit. So we have to make sure that we reiterate, we cannot discriminate against people because of conviction type. So as you're signing on to demand letters, as you're joining in with people in their advocacy, please make sure to communicate with people and have those conversations and ask people to expand their demands to include everyone. I thank you all so much for joining this conversation today. It is 5:31. I get really passionate. So as I'm sure the rest of the panelists do, and many people on this call. So thank you so much for joining. If you have further questions, you can always reach out to me, Amber Rose at curbprisonspending.org, and also other folks who are on the panel today. and to our organizations, and we will make sure to answer your questions, to get connected, and to continue this advocacy. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay safe. Love to you all.